Thank you all for joining me today. My name is Jason Amsbaugh. I'm the CEO of Samba Scientific. I see a number of friends and colleagues in the audience, so thank you all for joining. If you haven't met me before, I guess a quick bit of introduction. I've been in marketing for about 10 years. I've been running Samba Scientific for 7 years, and prior to that, I was in sales. And prior to that, I was a bench researcher. With that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. And here we go. All right. So first off, a little bit about Samba Scientific. We're founded in 2018. We have 21 fully remote employees, kind of across all aspects of production and account management, from strategy all the way through sort of AI technology experts. Our team is largely comprised of, I would say, recovering research scientists. We have more than 20 science degrees, and all of our account managers have PhDs. Altogether, we have a lot of experience in terms of life science research, sales, and marketing. Over 130 years for the team. We focus on all of the things that are relevant and trending in today's life science marketplace. So everything from research tools, diagnostics and clinical tools, drug discovery and development, as well as sort of therapeutic development. And our clients are large and small, from single-person startups all the way through publicly traded companies. Really, what do they all have in common is that they want to grow faster than they could organically, and so that's why they engage with us. Our services and capabilities are pretty broad. We develop marketing strategies and implement go-to-market plans. We work on branding and design, messaging, and positioning. We develop technical content, turn those into websites, drive traffic using digital marketing. We're a HubSpot certified service provider, I think a platinum partner now. I have, like I said, some AI technology stack that we dip into from time to time for lead identification and prospecting. Also are very strong in terms of using SEO and paid ads to drive traffic to websites. And we have our own webinar platform, which you guys are aware of because you're joining it today. All of our engagements are customized to client goals. So it really starts with a gap analysis of where you're at and where you want to go, into sort of strategic planning and creating the best possible plan to give you the highest likelihood of that sort of outcome. And then we turn it into a project, execute on all aspects of it, and keep an eye on the data in order to make good things better over time. I'm going to go ahead and so that was my spiel in terms of Samba. I'm going to talk a little bit about sales and marketing. This webinar was sort of directed actually towards sort of salespeople. So marketing, I mean, at a high level, just they need to build and launch products that people want and that customers want. Typically, they're training and supporting the sales team in those endeavors, both from a product management perspective as well as from a sort of a marketing management perspective. Sales obviously is in charge of sort of revenue fulfillment, and they have to hit their number. And there is occasionally some infighting between the two groups with regards to sales asking where my lead's at, what does marketing even do? And, you're giving me these leads, but they're not even qualified. Marketing, on the other hand, tends to tell sales that they're getting the positioning wrong. They need to build up value, stop discounting to get a deal. And then, of course, what about all those leads I sent you? Have you followed up on those yet? So the irony here, I guess, is that both of these teams are serving the customer who's really on a journey of their own, from identifying a problem, or that they even have a problem, looking for solutions, gathering information around possible solutions, assessing that information for fit, deciding to buy or not buy, and then ultimately making a purchase. And so it's better and best when these two teams work together. For today's presentation, I'm going to simplify marketing definition in terms of when people are interacting with things. Okay. So that's going to be different than sales, which I'm going to simply define as basically when people are interacting with people. So if you can imagine a person interacting with a website, that's going to be a marketing aspect. If you can imagine a face-to-face conversation with a customer, again, for today's presentation, that's going to be defined as sales. So in a perfect world, marketing is sort of setting them up, them being the customers, and sales is knocking them down, and this happens synergistically and quickly. But these times are sort of changing, and part of the issue there is that prior to COVID, connecting with customers was really easy from both a sales and a marketing perspective. People would take appointments, you could cold call, people opened emails and things like that. But since COVID, there's been sort of marked differences in customer behaviors that make it much more difficult to connect for a consultative discussion or even sort of this cold call. And it started with kind of remote or hybrid and then remote working. It's led to sort of fewer in-person meetings. There's less time available to meet due to tighter schedules. I'm sure all of you guys have multiple meetings stacked up in the day with no gaps between them, hopping from one Zoom meeting to another. Nobody's at their office phone anymore, which means it's all just personal cell phones if you want to connect with somebody. AI and marketing automation have sort of taken off. LinkedIn has been relied on really heavily as a B2B outreach tool. And then there's a huge amount of sort of lists that are available with professional contact information, not to mention sort of like more AI that leads to robocalls, robotext, email automation. And nobody's going to answer their cell phone or quite frankly, even respond to an email if they don't know who you are. So that is sort of the problem, I guess, that salespeople find themselves in today is that despite all of these new sales tools that I just mentioned, including things like intent-based searching or account-based marketing approaches and things like that, customer response rates are actually lower than they've ever been. And part of this, I think, is really just an overwhelm of the amount of media that's coming at people because it's so much cheaper and easier to find contact lists and then create sort of emails. So customers don't want to talk to you, quite frankly, until they understand that you can solve your problems, that you can solve their problems. And in the old days, and quite frankly, maybe even the most effective sales approach is a consultative method that really focuses on understanding the customer's needs and presenting a possible solution. So the benefit here to the customer is that you're not walking in there necessarily with an agenda to push a product on them. You're walking in there to understand kind of where they're at and whether or not your product could be a potential fit for them. And I think the best salespeople implement this routinely, and it's something that works to really great effect. So in this process of basically uncovering the customer's pain and sort of how to solve it, there's a lot of open-ended questions that salespeople typically are asking, right? Tell me about what you do, how you do it, what keeps you up at night? What are the top couple of things that you would improve about that? Why? How would fixing those problems be impactful to you? How would that improve your business? What would an ideal solution look like? And as salespeople are sort of asking these questions, what they're identifying is potential areas that they can position their products and services that would actually solve the problems, as well as qualifying that the customer even cares and that these solutions would be impactful to them at all. So when you come out of a consultative sort of sales discussion or this type of interview, you have a really powerful value prop, but it's really just for that only one person that you have sort of spoken to. And this, if anything, is maybe a limitation of sales when we're talking to one person at a time or when we're having these in-person touch points, whether it's on a Zoom call or in person, it's one by one and it's difficult to scale that up. And so it's a role then of marketing to think about how do we scale that type of value prop, the answers to those questions from one person to really the entire road and the entire segment. And so it starts this sort of scaling process and this positioning starts with these primary and secondary interviews with customers. So you can conduct more customer interviews, sales calls. You could potentially do voice of customer type surveys if you wanted to do that until you start to see trends in the answers. So once you are interviewing these customers, company leadership, or even as a proxy, senior sales reps, quite frankly, because they talk with a lot of customers, then you can start to identify trends in terms of similar needs, drivers, and the messaging that works on an in-person sort of level. And we can take that messaging and we can analyze these segments, identify really who our key segments are, where we think we can make the most immediate impact in terms of reaching our commercial goals. And then we can start to move to higher throughput approaches like surveys to gauge the size of the segments and assess their needs and see what the different segments are in terms of their needs and drivers and ultimately how big they are and how quick they're going to adopt. But these higher throughput approaches require lists typically in order to conduct surveys. There are some other approaches. You could do something like a LinkedIn survey and then share the results with all the respondents. Ultimately, we're sort of at this problem because if we want to scale up this type of messaging research, we're going to have to use a list, and unknown end users don't respond to cold emails. So there are certainly market research firms that have people on board and will conduct these interviews for you. I work with a lot of growth stage companies, and so I like to take this sort of empirical method, quite frankly, to use digital marketing and perform these experiments and test out value props in the wild, basically to determine what people seem to be most interested in based on their digital marketing metrics. So we can do this by doing things as simple as A/B testing on email subjects. So subjects, titles, and copy can reflect different customer needs or segments, and we can send them to, say, an email list if we have one, and we can see what people click on. We can create different ads or different landing pages and CTAs. And again, we can see which of those ads are the most popular, of those landing pages that people go to, which have the highest conversion rates, and of those CTAs or call to actions, the buttons on a web page, what are people clicking on and what do they find most useful? We can write quick blogs highlighting specific use cases, for example, and then you could sequentially post these to LinkedIn, share them with your personal network. I'm guessing that you guys here, just based on the names and the seniority of the people in this room, probably have larger personal networks than some of the startup companies that you guys are working for. And you can measure the results in terms of clicks, shares, and impressions to find out what it is people find interesting when you put this messaging out in the wild. We talked about the LinkedIn surveys. That's also something that you can do to get feedback from strangers or post to a specific group, for example, to take a little bit more targeted approach. So the goal of demand gen, which is probably more important now than it ever was before, is to really fill the funnel with leads to accelerate sales effectiveness. So we can think of basically our marketing funnel here being top of funnel, middle funnel, and bottom of funnel. And our top of funnel is full of suspects. These would be people that we think might be interested in our product. A middle of funnel is going to be contacts. So these are people that have converted on our website. We know who they are. They have names. And then bottom of funnel, we can think of as being marketing qualified leads or sales qualified leads. And we'll define those a little bit more in just a minute. So inbound marketing is a preferred strategy to enable customer discovery and generate demand. And it uses high value scientific content to create awareness and then generate that demand. And shout out to sort of a cliched movie, but the premise here of inbound marketing, if you're not familiar with it, is that if you build it, they will come. All right. And so maybe one way to think about that is if outbound sales is like going on a hunting expedition, then inbound marketing is like going fishing, where we're going to be in the right place with the right bait for the right type of fish. So the way that inbound marketing works mechanistically is that we first sort of identify our segments, and then we're going to build out content that adds value for a specific customer segment. And this content typically is in the form of a landing page with some type of deliverable or downloadable that people can use. So that content that we create can vary in length and complexity depending on the different funnel stages. So typically for the top of the funnel, we're looking to educate and make people aware that we have these offerings. And so we tend to lean heavily on things like search ads and display ads, graphics and GIFs, maybe some emails, conference events, blogs, animations. Mid-funnel, we want to inspire people that, holy cow, this is a great idea. And this is something essentially that could really help your life out. And so we tend to lean into things like explainer videos and webinars, more landing pages that have a detailed description of it. Applications pages, quite frankly, are incredibly high converting, and case studies might be the most inspiring thing of all. We also then want to reassure our users that this is a good product for them to fit. And so after they're inspired and they're considering purchasing, then we want to hit them with the data. One thing that's hard about selling to scientists, quite frankly, is that they're trained to be skeptics and they're trained to discount anything that doesn't have supporting data and to reject it. And so this is where using data in the scientific sales process is really important. So publications and posters, technical notes, product pages, technology pages, and white papers and publications, quite frankly, are all the types of collateral that we can use. And you could actually build up landing pages that contain all three of these sort of sections, top to bottom, that educate people on the top, that inspire them with a case study in the middle, and that show them some downloadable sort of data at the bottom. And these can be really high converting landing pages. So once we create that content, this is sort of where the fishing part comes in. You can imagine that the content is kind of the bait, and that we're going to put fishing lines or these sort of threads in all of the places where people hang out online. And the reason why we're going to do it online is because that's where everybody spends 90% of their working life is in front of their computer. And so we're going to put it in social media, we're going to put it on email marketing, search ads, blog, and even paid ads, third-party ads, and things like that, where people tend to hang out, where they tend to read the news. Once we drive that traffic from these channels to our website, then we'll use online forms to capture contact information. And this also gives us permission to contact them. And so that turns anonymous visitors that are clicking on this anonymous website visitors into named leads that we can then reach out to. Once a new contact converts, and by convert, I mean they fill out that form and we know who they are, then we can use marketing automation to serve up more content and nurture them to MQL status. So a new contact converts, and then we can create automated email nurturing paths that give them more content. So again, if they converted on something that was really high level, like say they just subscribed, we might offer them a contact that is inspirational in nature, something that showcases basically how they could use our product. And then over time, we increase that as we work them down the funnel. Now, every time that they interact with our materials online and we learn more about them from a demographic perspective, we can actually use a quantitative lead score, and we can increase that lead score until they hit sort of MQL status. And this allows us to identify basically when a customer is fully ready to engage with a sales team. And the benefit here is that they're going to be more qualified and they're going to be ready to engage. So these MQLs have interest, demonstrated interest in your products, and they fit your ideal customer profile, and that they continue to learn about that. And we understand from their demographics where they're at in terms of company, size, position, etc. So MQLs are much more responsive to be likely to a sales interaction than, say, non-qualified leads. Like I said, they meet out this agreed upon criteria based on a combination of online activities and demographic information, starting out as contacts, and then are assigned these points and ultimately are passed off to the sales team. So quantitative lead scoring is a process that we use to assess MQL status. And this is an example of MQL scoring criteria that we've set up. So if the goal here is 100 points, and if a contact achieves 100 points, then we elevate them to this MQL status. We send them over to the sales team. And you can see that there are demographics information. For example, we might give them 5 points if they're a PhD or a master's degree. Might give them 10 points if they're an MD, a JD, or an MBA, because these people tend to have sort of higher levels. 20 points if the job title contains director, professor, head, senior manager, investigator. 30 points if their job title is C-suite or vice or VP. And you can see then there's also this online activity. So we can give them positive scores when they open emails or view wage page views or download materials or fill out a key form fill, like request a quote, for example. If they're a competitor, we can give them a negative lead score. If they're using a personal, like a Gmail, they might be, less interested or less likely. We can subtract that. If they haven't opened emails in 90 days or haven't seen a web page, we can give them negative lead scores. And if they unsubscribe, then we can also remove them from that as well. So this MQL threshold can be adjusted based on sales capacity and feedback. And this is really, so we've implemented now MQL threshold and lead scoring so that we can adjust sort of triage. So if there are too few points, typically the feedback that you're going to get from the sales team is that the contact isn't interested or qualified, and the sales is reaching out to them prematurely, right? They're not ready to move forward and have a real discussion. But if there's too many points, you might find that your sales team just simply doesn't have enough leads to keep busy. Leads might be overqualified, and it might seem that we're sort of late to the game. So there's a balancing point here, and it's important, quite frankly, to be in touch with your reps or be in touch with your sales management team in order to identify basically the quality of the leads coming through and ultimately engage with people at an appropriate point when they have questions, when they understand who you are, what you represent, and when they're going to be receptive to that sort of sales interaction. One question that just popped up: what platforms do we recommend for lead scoring? So we're a HubSpot shop, and so we rely predominantly on that. And we've been using it. I've probably been using it for about 10 years. The platform has grown sort of significantly over time, but what I'm demonstrating and showing you guys today is based on HubSpot lead scoring platforms. All right. So I'm going to show you a little bit now that we've kind of covered now that we've kind of covered the basics. I'm going to show you sort of how this rolls into practice. So our basic inbound marketing funnel looks like this. So top of funnel, we talked about sort of social media channels and search. Again, we're trying to drive awareness. Mid funnel, really what we want to get people on is applications pages and product specific or application specific landing pages. And I talked about basically the different sections of these pages, basically from education through sort of inspiration and then reassurance. And quite frankly, so pro tip, the highest converting downloadable for this sort of mid-funnel lead capture is a case study. And so promoting case studies, creating these landing pages, the application pages, and then promoting them and driving that drives a ton of downloads, okay? And then as people are interested, first in applications, I understand how I could use this in my project, then typically scientists are going to want to know how it works. And so that's when we get sort of onto the technology page, and that's reassuring. They understand what the tech is. There's some technical data on there. And then typically it is only after we understand that you can solve my problems from an application perspective that I'm actually interested in learning about your sort of services and products. So again, we're trying to drive traffic to this website in terms of that top of funnel. That's really what we're trying to do. We're trying to download these case studies or other sort of downloadables mid funnel and get that conversion. And then again, we're using that marketing automation to give them additional materials that's relevant, to get them into the technology and get them more information about the product. And then if they're still engaged, connect them with sales. And that typically leads to their quote request, scheduling a meeting or a purchase. And so that's really what we're aiming to do. So we're not doing this blind, though. We can use data and analytics at each stage to measure success. And that's one benefit of digital marketing over print marketing, quite frankly, is that there are integrated metrics basically with each and every step. So if you think about the success from the top of funnel and we're just trying to get people on the websites, we can look at KPIs like impressions or clicks or follows or comments, shares, the number of unique visitors, the number of new versus returning visitors on your website. And these can come out of a number of different platforms, everything from Google Analytics to HubSpot to the individual social platforms and email platforms and CRMs that you guys might use. Mid funnel, we're really looking at this sort of conversion. And so we can think about time on page, bounce rates, pages viewed, and ultimately CTAs clicked and forms filled and downloaded. Bottom of funnel, we're really trying to hit this MQL sort of status reach. So our KPIs are really going to be based on sort of the number of MQLs or conversions that we have, the number of deals created, and ultimately the number of deals won. So we can, in building up these funnels, we can use these quantitative sort of objectives and back calculating what a marketing funnel might look like. So for example, if you as a sales manager need to go get $200,000 of new business this year with an average selling price of $20,000, you're going to have to close 10 new deals in the course of the year. If you have an average of, say, a 33% close rate, you're going to need 33 deals in your pipeline, right? And if your MQL to deal creation rate is 20%, for example, you're going to need 165 MQLs. We think about how many leads become MQLs. In this case, we'll say 20%. And so you're going to need 825 leads in your pipeline. And then if you're relying entirely on website traffic to drive this, then you might think about what is your site visit to lead rate. And that could only be, say, in this case, 3%, which means that you would have to get 27,000 or 500 sort of site visits needed in order to build up a funnel that would hit your $200,000 number. And so then the question for marketing is, how do we drive all this traffic? Is it going to be organic? Is it going to be paid? Is it going to be, social, email, advertising, webinars, and things of that nature? So one thing I just want to call out is that once you have an understanding basically what your KPIs and what your quantitative objectives are at each phase of that funnel, each stage of that funnel, that was a fun one, then you can optimize one stage of that funnel and you can have a significant effect on that deal flow. So if I take that same math, for example, and I can increase my site visit to lead rate. So this is on-page conversion after I've driven them to the site. So it's going to drive the same number of leads to the site, but they're just going to convert instead of at 3%, they're going to convert at 5%. And then we see a dramatic shift in the numbers in terms of the number of leads generated, from 800 to 1300, MQLs generated from 165 to 275, deals created, deals won, and ultimately a significantly higher amount of revenue. And so this, I think, is quite frankly, the goal is to create a robust marketing funnel that is metrics based, to monitor the metrics at each stage of that funnel, and then to optimize as we go. So that will allow us to move from sort of effective marketing, which is to say we are getting leads, we are getting clicks, we are creating deals, to efficient marketing. And really what I'm talking about in terms of efficiency is moving from sort of lower in this low number of leads here on the left-hand corner. So here we have leads, we have overall sort of SEO value, and we have our cost per lead in green. And from sort of a starting position where we're building kind of this infrastructure, and then through extensive sort of iterative optimization, we can get to sort of a high ROI, so a high number of leads at a very low cost per lead in this right-hand corner. And that ultimately is where we want to drive our funnel and where we want things to go. Okay, so a bit of a segue now. So starting with branding and positioning, a couple questions to ask ourselves. Do we have sound strategy? Like, at a basic level, do we know who our customers are and we understand their challenges and we can clearly describe how we can help them? And we have proof points for that, and we know where to reach them with regards to sort of channels or conferences. And if you don't know this, quite frankly, then we're going to go back to the beginning, like I was saying, and try to use a consultative process in order to start to get these answers, fill them out, and then, quite frankly, scale up that positioning. Are we presenting ourselves well? So objectively, are we being authentic in how we represent ourselves in our company? Like, does our visual branding align with the tone and the voice of our written materials of our employees, for example? Pretty basic. And then even from like a communication question, do customers understand what we do? And I guess you'd be surprised. There's a surprising, if you go and walk the floor at any sort of trade show and you just, read the backdrops, as you're sort of perusing around, like, how many times do you actually know what it is that people are really doing? So clarifying that online in print and keeping it consistent, quite frankly, is really important. So sometimes rebranding can have a big impact in terms of aligning really this brand with the voice and clarifying what it is. So here's a quick case study. We engaged with company Upcara. They have an alternative to lyophilization that creates room temperature stable reagents for kit manufacturing. Their goal, they were really struggling that people didn't remember them, they didn't know who they were. They wanted to clarify their sort of brand and offerings and communication and also create a more memorable name. And so they came to us with a new name, Ambient Biosciences. And then we interpreted that, creating new brand guidelines and a new logo, a new color palette, quite frankly, and some key messaging around that, and then rolled that out into a new website. And what they saw was that there was a significant increase in online lead activity. So they had a 50% increase in website sessions, that a 2 times or 200% increase in website engagement time, and a 6x increase in new contacts gained from online forums. And I guess what's sort of interesting here, yeah, there was some rework with regards to the website and the properties, but at the end of the day, the offering was the same, and the data points that they had to offer were the same as well. Quite frankly, just repackaged into something that was a little bit more modern. And again, that's something that made a little bit more sense to their audience. All right. So if we're good on our messaging, we're good on our branding, the next thing we're going to want to do is just drive traffic to our website. Social media driven campaigns can really drive registrations, and we've seen significant success working with small healthcare organizations. So Dexterity is a diagnostic laboratory based in Los Angeles that focuses on immune diseases via RNA profiling. And they came out with this Chrome study that was focused on chronic fatigue syndrome. And it was an observational study that really they were just looking to recruit people and then ultimately do blood-based RNA profiling in order to understand the correlations between gene expression and chronic fatigue syndrome. So we put together this campaign. This is a snapshot of some of that collateral that I showed you. Their goal was 200 registrants. I think we were 4 months in, we had 621. So we were able to exceed their goal. And again, this was really driven from sort of the authenticity, I think, and the branding and the visual appeal of the messages that we put, again, onto an audience and onto a channel where people were actively researching these diseases and talking sort of about that sort of thing. Display ads can drive sort of significant website traffic. And so this is a company, LevGo, and they create the smart spatula. So they are a lab supply company. And this is a patented smart spatula, this lab spatula that has a V at the neck. And we created sort of this cartoony campaign. They liked it. It's really kind of different, I think, compared to what you would see in typical sort of biotech ad campaigns, including this guy, including there's a streamer guy, I think, that they take to conferences now, that waves his hand and stuff like that. But 6 months of sort of this campaign into this, we achieved 10 million Google Ads impressions, 5.8 million LinkedIn impressions, 222,000 third-party ad impressions, and that resulted in over 59,000 ad clicks. So they invested heavily on top of funnel to drive all of those clicks basically and all that traffic to their website. And again, it was really, kind of driven by these display ads as opposed to sort of search ads. Webinars are sort of great for both top and mid sort of funnel lead generation projects. So I mentioned that we had a webinar platform here and we work with a lot of companies on that. What's really great about, I'd say, webinars for scientists is that they're peer-to-peer testimonials. So typically we have if we can get a customer speaker talking about how they use a product on a specific killer application that's trending and they're presenting data, then that tends to be, quite frankly, very convincing. And it really can extend your reach. The audience is pretty qualified because they've all self-selected to spend their time there. And we typically see a much higher ROI on this than conferences, largely because you don't have to fly everybody there, take a week out of your time. You can do this from your desk, sort of generally. So quick case study. So Allspath, a company out of Sweden, had a big publication last year in JAMA Neurology talking about tau 217 and phosphorylated tau basically as a biomarker being used to diagnose Alzheimer's disease, so a blood-based biomarker. And so we put together a webinar for them. There was a significant sort of attendance. I think we had 430 registrants, 202 attendees, so a ton of people showed up for this. One of those people was actually the head of diagnostics for neuro applications at Roche. And so several months later, they first signed this press release that caught my eye, and I went back and looked at the registrant list and sort of saw that. It was followed up pretty quickly by Beckman Coulter. Time named this one of the best innovations of 2024, and they continue to sort of license it and make additional kind of deals as they've gone along. So just increasing the visibility can really accelerate commercial success. And that's something I think that's important, regardless of how you do it, whether or not it's at webinars or at conferences, et cetera. But I would argue that digital means, quite frankly, provide a higher ROI than a lot of conferences and in-person activities do today. Cold email case study. This is fun. There is no good cold email case study, okay? And I guess that's really, if anything, the title of this webinar is like, despite the Apollo AI and despite, Zoom Info and account-based marketing like Rollworks and AdWorks and these display ads that go out to millions of people and generate all of these impressions, what, scraping email lists, pulling people down off of LinkedIn, using SciLeads, for example, or Amplion or other list sort of creation tools, people are pretty sophisticated, even using AI approaches to say, look at somebody's LinkedIn profile and create a highly customized sort of intro email. What we find is that if the sender doesn't know you or understand why you're reaching out to them, they're not going to respond. And increasingly, it's sort of a question of, is the email even getting to their inbox? And now there's entire companies that are sort of being spawned to guarantee that your email is delivered to somebody's Outlook box and can sidestep these sort of spam filters. So what really works, I'd say, is kind of well with email is, quite frankly, when you know who you're talking to, when they are opted in to begin with, or when you're re-engaging with previous contacts. On these cold ABM type email lists, typically the positive response rate is less than 1%. So like 0.1% positive response rate is fairly typical from what I've understood. And, compare that to, say, a 20% open rate on a warm email list or an opted-in email list. And so, again, that just highlights the need to get people converted, quite frankly, and then using email for follow-up as opposed to filling that top of funnel. I would say that if you really wanted to get an email list and you wanted to send emails to people, best practice, quite frankly, is to lead with a single strong call to action that leads to that opt-in rate. So again, for example, sending an email to somebody to say, attend this webinar is really good because then they attend the webinar and they can opt in, for example, or send an email that says, download this case study, and you think it's relevant to them. You're going to get a whole lot more than if you say, hi, my name is, and we do these things, et cetera, which is kind of what they tend to be. There's a question, are there known industry standards or trends for conversion percentages at each funnel stage that we can use for back calculations if we don't have internal data? I don't know that there are specific to this industry. We see sort of large variations from sort of client to client, depending on kind of how niche or how specific or how sort of broad I would say their product is and how many people are sort of interested in that. I don't think that we've ever compiled across all of our clients. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is basically baseline and then drive the number up. And so that's something that we do as well. All right. So once we're driving traffic to our website, again, ads, social, webinars, then we're looking at optimizing your site ads and landing pages with time check. So optimizing the site for conversion and then using a webinar to drive traffic is a tactic that we used for TwinStrand a couple of years back. So we looked at their website, content, page flow, and made some sort of updates there. We gated all of the existing assets behind HubSpot forums, and then we created and promoted a webinar, in this case, talking about ultra-sensitive NGS for mutagenesis detection and toxicology applications. So the results that they got in terms of webinar attendance, I'd say were pretty in line and kind of middle of the road. They had 123 new contacts. They had 38 MQLs sort of from that webinar, but they had one hot lead that was a six-figure deal that closed within weeks of attendance. They had a 90%. So following that webinar in the months that followed, they saw a 90% increase in site visitors. So I was actually during webinar promotion, and a 56% increase in contact us page conversion rates following those website updates. And this resulted in sort of ongoing 150 new contacts and 20 new MQLs per month. So really going from existing materials that they had, I don't think we created any new content for these guys as much as we just put it behind these HubSpot forums, did some promotion to drive the traffic to the website that was then optimized to get people to fill in these leads. Another sort of thing here's another sort of approach. So this is actually using an experimental approach to Google Ads optimization. So in this example, so Aviva creates ELISA kits and custom antibodies, and we basically took an approach to conduct 14 experiments over 6 months, basically comparing bidding, ad copy, and keyword strategies, as well as site and sort of page optimization. So here you can see the control. This is how things were. So they got 48 clicks, 2,000 impressions, and a $22 cost per click with a total cost of $1,000. In their treatment arm, they were able to basically double the impressions, the clicks, and then the cost per click went down significantly. They actually reduced their ad spend. And so what we saw, again, after a 6-month time frame with no increase in ad budget, was that they had 11% increase in impressions, a 32% increase in ad clicks, 833% increase in conversions, and an 85% decrease in cost per conversion. So anyway, it was a good case study in terms of basically optimization. These guys were running ads before they came and worked with us. They're still running ads today. They're just getting a lot more bang for their buck at this point. And then we talked about sort of bottom funnel nurturing leads and MQLs. Here's another case study, Singular Genomics. So a next-gen sequencing and now spatial platform out of San Diego. They launched the G4 sequencer sort of several years back. And really what we did was to create this automated HubSpot workflow where anytime somebody became a marketing contact, they were sent these sort of emails, and then there were multiple branches. If they filled out forms, they would receive sort of different emails. If their lead score is greater than 100, they would go to MQL nurturing workflow and get sort of kicked out. And if they weren't, it'd be sent sort of another webinar, on-demand webinars and stuff like that. And so this is really just a demonstration of how you can use existing content, stitch them together, again, using this sort of automation in order to increase that sort of lead score, increase that engagement. So we enrolled 1,000 website visitors, I think, kind of briefly. We had 22 sort of MQL conversions out of sort of all of those leads. So again, a good way to triage, as opposed to reaching out to 1,000 different leads from your website visitors that are named, reaching out to 22 people that have meaningful conversations. And then subsequently, we enrolled 9,000 additional contacts and continue to nurture those up. If you put this all together, this is a case study. AGC Biologics is a CDMO based in Seattle. They're global. They have multiple sites across Europe and Asia. They approached us with just goals of increasing website traffic, increasing lead generation, improving CRM utilization. And our general actions were to add planning and development, to do some landing page optimization. We created some content for SEO growth, promoted that via social and email to their existing opted-in users, and then uses that automated lead nurturing in order to basically go from sort of mid-funnel to bottom funnel. And the results here, again, that we saw were fairly significant. So 340% increase in total monthly leads, 60% increase in website traffic, 35% increase in top 10 sort of keyword rankings, and 39 leads per month from digital ads on average, kind of ongoing. So that's really the end of the sort of the case studies. What I hope I conveyed during this presentation is, first off, sales and marketing need to be friends. Marketing can lean heavily on sales in early days in order to identify kind of key and winning positioning. Sales can absolutely iterate positioning in the field and come back, communicate that to marketing, who can then take sort of an experimental approach to finding out what it is that people can click on, right? Hopefully I've convinced you, or at least shown some data, that despite all the advances in AI technology, in identifying accounts that show search intent, for example, or ABM, or these sort of highly automated email platforms, nothing beats an opted-in email list. And the best way to get that is using inbound marketing. And then ultimately, by using a data-driven approach, we can move from being effective marketers and getting some clicks to being efficient marketers and really improving ROI that ultimately affect your bottom line and allow you guys to hit your goals and continue to grow as companies. So with that, I'm going to switch to sort of a Q&A. So there are a couple different kind of questions here. So the first question is, when should I use SEO versus search ads? So organic versus paid advertising in order to drive website traffic. So search ads are great if you are presenting a solution that people are actively researching, quite frankly, and then you can sort of serve that up. And SEO, quite frankly, if people are trying to do that as well. Ads work really fast. And so I'd say that's going to be the primary difference. You can create and implement ad campaigns and start seeing results in weeks. SEO is typically a longer gain. So there's a couple discrete steps that we take during SEO optimization, site speed optimization, and then on-page optimization and meta optimization. And what we see is kind of a significant boost in SEO, but then in order to continue to grow that, you typically have to create content over time. So I would say if you want results today, start with ads. If you want long-term and cheaper results with higher ROI, you should look at SEO. Ideally, you could do both in parallel, provided that you have basically the resources to do that, and then you have the best of both worlds. You get the good SEO. Quite frankly, it's going to cheapen, or it's going to lower your cost per click. So you're going to get higher ROI on your ads as you go over time. Nice thing about ads too is you can turn it up or turn it down depending on budget constraints or what your pipeline looks like. If you need more leads or less leads, you could either save marketing budget, quite frankly, or you could get more leads in the door. So when do we use email as part of a campaign? What are the best practices? What are your thoughts on gating all the assets versus leaving some ungated? All right, so a couple different questions here. I recommend using email, quite frankly, for nurturing post-conversion, or, for example, if you are going to use some sort of outbound, a single touch email based on business intent and likelihood of business interest to drive traffic to something that opts somebody in, like I said, like downloading a case study or attending a webinar. That's really all I would say. So top of funnel, driving towards a downloadable, and then, like I said, sort of post-conversion for nurturing. What are my thoughts on gating all assets versus leaving some ungated? So this thing about assets gating comes up a lot. And ultimately, I guess as a marketer, I get paid, or you guys as marketing professionals probably get paid on leads generated. And so you have to track it simply. And the only way to track it, so, we can look at page views as sort of a leading indicator, but quite frankly, from a lead gen perspective, I would argue you should gate almost all of your assets, and certainly the ones that are the most interesting and the ones that are sort of lower in the funnel. So I guess, quite frankly, I might even say, if you're not going to gate the asset, then just put that copy, just put that text on a web page and people could just read it like a blog. You don't even have to go through the hassle of creating a PDF for somebody to download if you're not going to measure it. So I would recommend that you guys gate all of your assets, all of your technical assets, so that you can measure the results of it and so that you can drive that up over time. All right, let's see. We got some good questions here. Okay, so a couple different questions here. The first one is, how will AI change marketing activities, and how should companies leverage AI to streamline marketing activities? So how AI will change marketing activities, or is changing activities, quite frankly, is sort of interesting. Like I said, there's a couple sort of use cases that people have used immediately. One is in content generation. And so you can certainly GPT up blogs, or articles, and you can rewrite things to your tone of voice. I worked or met, I guess I knew of a financial firm, and they said that they had fed all of their copy through, they had trained GPT to speak in a Wall Street Journal style, and they fed all of their old content into it and rewrote all of their copy basically using GPT to rewrite sort of things like that. What we've seen a lot of is sort of, or what people I think really want to do beyond sort of content creation is sort of user identification. And so that's where I said basically, based on somebody's email address, finding their profile on LinkedIn, finding their university profile, compiling that together, and then writing a customized email for outreach is something that people are already doing. Again, it doesn't necessarily work all that well. And then, so content creation, lead generation, what else would I say in terms of sort of AI? Predictive analytics. So the idea that you can identify people that have high intent, are more interested in your products based on their demographic profiles as well as their online activity, even if it's not on your cookied sites, is something that people would want to do. So how should companies leverage AI to streamline marketing activities? If you're a small firm, I would say, potentially you could look at content generation or sort of lead pull down type stuff. The problem that I see, it's really, really ultimately what I feel about AI today is it's really good for prototyping things. And it's really not good at just that specific nuance in terms of kind of getting it. So honestly, I would use it as a brainstorming tool and leave the real work to people still, if you are able to do that and if you have the resources to do that. Somebody asked about LinkedIn. Is the investment worth it? So what we have found for LinkedIn is that it's really good at raising sort of visibility because it has really good targeting available, like potential. So we can refine our audiences based on skills and the groups that they're in. For example, we can get the right ads, I think, in front of the right people. It tends not to drive a whole lot of clicks. We see actually lower ROI typically than we do using Google ads or even third-party ads sometimes. So it tends to be expensive. Is the investment worth it? If you have the budget and you want to raise awareness, then I would say a targeted LinkedIn ad with display ads, for example, is very good at getting in front of people. But again, I would just temper your expectations with regards to the actual leads or the click-throughs that you're going to get, because by and large, people don't click on banner ads, is something I guess that I've sort of seen. All right, what else do we have? What are the strategies employed to request customer speakers? I've been at organizations which repeatedly ask the same customers, which gets old quickly. I would recommend, so if you can find a customer, I think the people that are going to be, there's kind of two types of people that are going to want to speak. One is going to be sort of established people, and they have a lot to say. These are going to be sort of your KOL types people. They're going to be hard to reach out with. So the pros and cons. The pros is that they're very well known and they're going to be very robust. They're going to be very good speakers. The con, quite frankly, is that they tend to be pretty busy. And so their calendars book up and they, quite frankly, might not be interested. What I found is I feel like people that are trying to make a name for themselves are a little hungrier. They're pushing new technology and they're adopting new technology. And so if you can find, I would say, sort of a profile of an up-and-coming postdoc, an associate professor, somebody that is using your thing, somebody ideally that sort of published it, might not be well known in the field, and you give them a platform, I think that actually is generally more interesting than say a KOL that the first third of their talk is like their standard kind of intro. So that's what I would recommend in terms of trying to reach out to people. So direct outreach, send a personalized email saying, you saw their publications or you saw their bind, you want to talk to them with that sort of interest. Identify somebody, try to build some rapport there, and then ask them for that favor. Another question: am I seeing a shift in the use of search platforms within the scientific community? If so, should we look at shifting ad spend, or would you shift ad spend? So we predominantly see people continuing to use Google as a search engine largely, and a little bit of Bing. And it feels like that really hasn't changed over the last several years. So I wouldn't say necessarily that you should pursue another search platform kind of greatly, and that I should qualify that within the US specifically. But I do think that it's worth putting probably a small amount of your budget, once you're optimized, replicating that type of ad budget, say from Google to Bing, in order to just garner and capture additional users from a minority audience that does tend to use that platform. So one question here: can you give a ballpark figure for a managed marketing budget per year for a new company launching a product based on a new technology? So I have a new company with a new technology, and sort of what is the budget? I can say that when I headed up marketing and industry and some different startups, my spend for ads, so I went to 12 conferences a year, and my total marketing budget was $600,000. And that was able to achieve a market leading sort of position, I would say, within 2 years, basically on a first-in-class technology with a new company. And so I'd say that's probably at the high end. Quite frankly, for our clients, what we typically recommend is maybe $3,000 to $5,000, maybe even $2,000 or $3,000 per month for sort of search ads or Google ads as basically like a necessary spend. So that could probably be done for 40 or 50K per year in terms of just straight up ad spend. The more resources that you have, I'd say kind of better. And if you're able to generate content and write internally, then you can save a lot of money, sort of in a general sense. So I don't know if hopefully that answered that question there. Another question here, what is a good balance between digital marketing activities and live events such as conferences? Should we do both? Should we prioritize one over the other? So I think you should do both. And I would prioritize digital over in-person events. But the reason why events are important, quite frankly, is to connect face to face with people that are at the meeting. And so I had a slide actually in this deck and I took it out because it just felt like it was getting long. But the way to maximize a conference event and really get sort of maximized is to do everything that you can while you're there. So ideally, you have a poster or multiple posters, which requires you submitting abstracts a month in advance. And those are technical in nature. If there's an opportunity for a sponsored talk and you can get on the podium, then you absolutely should. It's costly, but that's a great way to raise awareness. You should have a booth. And in your booth, you should have reprints of those posters as well as basically, invitations to the talk and potentially an invitation to a customer event, some sort of mingler, happy hour, or something like that, where you can sort of connect with people on a one-on-one basis, especially if you're new. It also makes it easy for people to find you. Prior to the conference, I would highly recommend putting together a digital campaign, including a landing page, emails, and social media posts to announce to the world that you're going to be there and you're going to present these posters, give this talk, and hopefully have this sort of event. And then, quite frankly, there's also a great opportunity for a follow-up sort of activity after a conference, say a webinar or something like that, that might be, say, 2 to 4 weeks after the conference itself, such that the people that you met at the conference, which a fraction of them are going to respond to direct outreach, but giving them an easy way to learn more about your products and company now that they're a little bit aware of you, to sort of re-engage, get back in the funnel, and quite frankly, educate themselves. So I think that, I think doing both is really important. What I just described from a conference perspective is an expensive way to do it, but that is also the most effective in terms of getting the ROI and just getting sort of bang for the buck. So anyway, I guess that's a question. Yeah, do both if you can. Again, thank you to all of you for coming up. Like I said, a lot of friends and sort of colleagues in the audience today. So give me some feedback, guys, and let me know what you think. To everybody else, thanks for taking your time out of your day to learn more about inbound marketing and learn a little bit about Samba Scientific. If you do have any questions, you can reach out to me directly. This is my email. So thank you, everybody, and take care and have a great day.